Okay, so picture the scene, right? A quiet room, the family's all there, and the lawyer is reading the will. You'd think it's a moment for closure, maybe reflection.
Yeah, you hope so.
But instead, you can just feel this tension building. Every sentence lands like a little bomb. Promises made years ago, across the dinner table. Suddenly, they just don't match the paper.
Mm-hmm. That happens a lot.
And that antique clock, the one you always knew was meant for you, with all those memories,
Mm-hmm.
suddenly it's just another asset, something to be valued and split. And the bitterness starts right there. It feels like a real betrayal.
It really does. It strikes at something deep. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it, this whole process?
Hmm.
It's not just about who gets what. It digs into legacy, family history, connection.
And how quickly those bonds can just unravel.
It's a powerful human drama, and honestly, happens more often than we'd like to think. We spend our lives building things, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah, building a life, savings, a home.
Exactly. And we just assume our wishes will be followed, that the family will handle it with, well, grace and understanding. But the truth is, even with the absolute best intentions, maybe especially without solid planning, we can accidentally set the stage for conflict.
So the very legacy you wanted to protect ends up crumbling.
It can, and that forces a really uncomfortable question.
Right.
What if you're next? Not next to pass on necessarily, but next to see your good intentions pave the way for, well, disaster, for discord.
That's a sobering thought, that good intentions aren't enough. History's full of examples, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You look at families like the Rothschilds. For 200 years, they've used trusts very strategically. It wasn't just about the money. It was about keeping the family fabric reasonably intact across generations.
Okay, so that's one side.
Then you have someone like Aristotle Onassis, a very shrewd guy. He left his fortune to his daughter Christina, but crucially, in a trust, he seemed to understand that just handing over raw wealth can be dangerous.
And the flip side.
The classic cautionary tale. The Vanderbilts. I mean, unimaginable wealth, right? But it mostly evaporated in just 3 generations. Why? A big part was the lack of structure of planning for the future.
Wow. It really changes how you look at inheritance then. It's not just handing things over. It's a test.
A test of foresight, definitely.
Yeah.
And maybe even more, a test of understanding, well, human nature.
Right. Because the sources we looked at really hammer this point home.
Right.
Good people, loving parents, spouses,
Mhm.
they can still leave behind an absolute minefield. Legally, emotionally.
Precisely. The system itself, the legal frameworks, the taxes, they don't inherently prioritize keeping families happy or honoring whispered promises. And then you throw in basic human emotions, maybe some greed, some old resentments.
And it all comes bubbling up. You mentioned examples like a nephew deciding to sue.
Yeah, or a remarried spouse maybe redirecting wealth unintentionally, or a child going through a tough time, divorce, addiction, and suddenly their inheritance is vulnerable. These aren't rare scenarios.
Which brings us to what the material calls the great question. Why do we pour our lives into building wealth, securing our future, but then leave its preservation and transfer kind of up to chance?
It's a huge disconnect. We often hear that trusts and complex planning are just for the super wealthy.
Right. That's not for me.
But the wealthy often use these tools precisely because they've seen or understood these pitfalls. It's not about control from the grave necessarily. Often it really stems from love, wanting to protect your family from pitfalls, maybe even from their future selves or bad decisions.
So our mission in this deep dive is really to face that deeper, darker truth about how inheritance actually works or doesn't work.
Exactly. And that truth starts by dismantling what's called the illusion of control. You might have a will, signed, sealed, delivered, you've listed beneficiaries, you feel like you've ticked the box.
Done your duty.
Right. But the moment you're gone, that control, it dissolves fast. Inheritance isn't this clean handoff. It's more like running a gauntlet bureaucracy, raw emotions, institutional forces that play by their own rules, not necessarily yours.
So it's not just legal paperwork. It's a psychological battlefield.
That's a very good way to put it. It absolutely can be.
Okay, let's get into that. The sources lay out 3 hidden forces sabotaging your legacy. First one, the bit of rationality, or why blood turns to poison. Oof, that's blunt.
It is blunt, and it cuts right to the core. We project our own logic, our own sense of fairness onto others, especially family. We assume shared history means shared perspective.
But it doesn't always work that way.
No. Schopenhauer had that quote, right, about the limits of your own worldview. Grief messes with people's heads, and money. Well, money complicates things dramatically. Once your voice is gone, your intentions, they're suddenly up for grabs, open to interpretation.
And that's where the fighting starts.
Often, yes. And interestingly, the sources mention the sibling rivalry paradox. Get this. Nearly 60% of family wealth fights aren't about pure greed. They're about perceived unfairness.
So it's not, I want more, it's that's not fair, or mom always loved you best, that kind of thing.
Exactly that. Those old dynamics, they come roaring back. It's incredibly potent.
Wow.
Right.
Okay. And tied into that is something about the heirs dilemma, Jung's shadow self.
Right. The idea is that a big inheritance, this sudden change, it can trigger stuff in people. Aspects of their personality they usually keep in check. The responsible kid might suddenly become reckless. The quiet one might become surprisingly aggressive about getting their share.
So nobody's immune, no matter how close the family seems.
That's the sobering message. You just can't predict how people will react under that kind of pressure and grief, especially when money's involved.
Okay, force number 2. The state as silent partner, building on Sartre. Hell is other people, and sometimes the government. How does that work in inheritance?
Well, it's about the system itself. Probate, for instance. That's the official court process for validating a will.
Right. Sounds straightforward.
It sounds it, but it's often anything but. It's usually slow, can take months, easily years in complex cases. It's public record, so all your family business, financial details, it's out there. And it's expensive. Legal fees, court costs, they can eat up 5, maybe even 10% of the estate.
10%. Just for the process.
Just for the process. Before you even get to taxes, federal estate tax kicks in at a high level currently, but many states have their own inheritance taxes. Pennsylvania, for example, taxes transfers even between parents and children.
So you can get hit multiple ways.
Absolutely. And the sources pose this really sharp question. You spend your life building something valuable. Why let the system perform this slow, public, expensive autopsy on it and then take a big slice?
Given all that, why is probate the default? Why do so many people end up there?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Often it's lack of awareness, procrastination, or thinking a simple will is enough. Which leads us nicely to the third force.
Okay, number 3. The perversion of time. And this uses Nietzsche's warning about looking into the abyss. That sounds ominous.
The abyss here is the future. It's unpredictable. We think of our kids inheriting as they are now, but the person who actually inherits is a future version of them. Life happens.
Right. Things change.
Massively. Divorce, lawsuits, maybe they marry someone you wouldn't have chosen, maybe they develop an addiction, or just become, frankly, naive about money. That's the stranger problem. The person inheriting isn't quite the person you planned for.
And that ties into the windfall curse.
Exactly. The statistic is shocking. 70% of family wealth is gone by the second generation, 70%. And it's not always bad investments. Often it's just lack of preparation, lack of structure for handling that wealth.
So just leaving a lump sum is actually risky.
It can be incredibly risky. Without structure, guidance, maybe some controls, it can be a burden, not a blessing.
So these 3 forces, rationality myth, the state, time's unpredictability, they paint a pretty bleak picture. But the sources go deeper, to the deeper disease, our delusion of permanence. What's that about?
It's about our psychology around death. Viktor Frankl's idea, that space between stimulus and response. We often fail to choose wisely in that space when it comes to mortality and legacy.
How does that show up?
In a few ways, there's the nostalgia trap, thinking, oh, my family's different, we're close, we won't fight like those people.
Denial, basically.
Pretty much. Then the procrastination paradox. I'll deal with it later. Later often never comes, or it comes too late. And finally, the magical thinking virus. The vague hope that they'll figure it out.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. Just hope for the best.
Right. But hope isn't a strategy. The sources argue this isn't just laziness. It's a kind of philosophical failure to really confront what our mortality means for those we leave behind.
It's like we know we're going to die, but we don't really act like it when it comes to planning for it. We keep it at arm's length emotionally.
Perfectly put. And that emotional distance has very real, very tangible consequences.
Which brings us to the turning point. Huxley's line, ignored facts don't go away. What are the key facts we need to stop ignoring?
3 main ones. 1, building wealth is only half the job. Foresight and transferring it is just as vital. 2, love isn't enough. Without structure, love and inheritance can become a toxic mix, a liability. 3, the system, as it stands, often benefits from our unpreparedness.
But there's a way out, a way to impose order.
Yes, the sources are clear. There's a tool, a strategy that savvy families have used for centuries to navigate this chaos.
Okay, before we get to the tool, let's talk about the damage, the unseen consequences. The sources use an analogy, an oak tree falling after an axe strike.
Yeah, it illustrates how the impact isn't always immediate. An inadequate plan might seem okay at first, but the axe strike happens at death, and the family harmony, the wealth can fall years later, even generations later. The damage ripples outwards.
And the first consequence detailed is the fractured family, when love becomes litigation. The numbers are stark. 15% of wills contested. Siblings stop speaking.
It's brutal, and the psychological toll is immense. Schopenhauer compared really bitter family fights to rats trapped in a cage just tearing each other apart. It's not just about money. It rewrites family history, poisons memories. Your death becomes this permanently damaging event.
Horrible thought. Then there's the predator economy, how outsiders feast on the unprotected. Sounds like something out of a nature documentary.
It kind of is. It refers to external threats. The divorce loophole. If inherited money gets mixed with marital money, boom, it can be up for grabs in a divorce.
Even if it was clearly inheritance.
And if it's commingled, yes, often. Then the creditor trap, lawsuits, medical bills, bankruptcy. If the heir holds the assets directly, creditors can potentially seize them.
Wow.
And the government's cut, again, taxes and fees chipping away, especially without planning. The point is, unprotected wealth is vulnerable from many angles.
Okay, next. The heir's curse. Why sudden wealth destroys more than it builds. This feels counterintuitive. Isn't leaving wealth the goal?
It seems like it, but the sources show it can backfire. Think lottery winners, huge numbers go bankrupt quickly. Why? Often, no financial literacy, plus the psychological shock.
The brain science part was interesting. Dopamine rush like drugs.
Yeah, sudden large sums can trigger poor decision-making. And Vanderbilt example again, the dynasty paradox. Massive wealth lost because later generations maybe felt entitled, lacked guidance, lacked controls. You're not just leaving money, you're leaving a test. And unprepared heirs often fail it.
So leaving money without structure can actually harm them.
It genuinely can. Which leads into the silent theft, how the system profits from your silence. Starting with probate again, but framed as a legal black hole.
Right. We covered the delays 12, 24 months sometimes, assets frozen, the costs up to 10% gone in fees, and the publicity. Everything laid bare. It's positioned as a major drain. And then the tax bite you never see coming. We touched on state taxes, but there was more about capital gains, the step-up basis myth.
Yeah, people think the step-up in basis wipes out all tax on inherited assets. It helps, yes, the value is reset to the date of death for capital gains purposes. But if the estate owes estate tax and assets have to be sold to pay that tax, you can still face capital gains on appreciation since the death. On top of the estate tax itself, it's not a perfect shield.
Okay, that's a complexity most people probably miss.
Very easily missed. And then there's the bureaucratic quicksand.
Our hurdles.
Practical ones. Accounts frozen instantly. Forced sales of assets, maybe at bad prices, to pay bills or taxes. And the surprise for many. Even small estates, maybe $50,000 or $100,000, depending on the state, often still have to go through probate. It's not just for millionaires.
That definitely busts a common myth. Finally, the sources talk about the deeper cost, lost legacies, beyond the money.
This is about the sentimental stuff. The family cabin that has to be sold because heirs can't agree or afford it. Grandma's ring that disappears into the division. The family business that gets dismantled. Real legacy is about meaning, memories, connection. And the standard system can strip that away.
So all these consequences, they lead to another turning point. The idea isn't that this is just bad luck. It's by design, or at least a predictable outcome of the current system.
That's the assertion. That these aren't random tragedies, but often the logical result of relying on outdated or inadequate methods. And crucially, that savvy families have known this for ages and used a specific tool, this smarter container, to avoid it all.
Not just a will, not just any lawyer, but something more robust.
Exactly. A structure designed to withstand greed, outsmart the system's pitfalls, and actually enforce your intentions long after you're gone.
Okay, so let's pull this all together. The core issue we've dissected is just how vulnerable standard inheritance approaches are. Human nature gets in the way, the legal system has its own agenda, life throws curveballs.
Right. And the big insight, the takeaway, is that proper planning isn't just itemizing assets. It's really about preserving your values, trying to ensure family harmony continues, and projecting your positive influence forward in time.
Which circles back to that really powerful question. What do you want to keep alive? Thinking about that changes everything, doesn't it? It makes planning less about death and more about enduring impact.
It absolutely does. It shifts it from a task to, well, a creative act in a way.
A creative act, I like that.
And the final thought the sources leave us with is this. Setting up the right structure, like a trust, isn't an ending point. It's the start of a story. A story you write that can potentially protect and guide for generations.
So the question for everyone listening is, what story do you want your legacy to tell? What steps might you need to take to make sure it's the story you intend?